let's look even a little bit more into validity, and I'm going to introduce the next concept that applies to arguments. Remember, validity applies to arguments, not to sentences, not to premises. True, false, that applies to premises, sentences, not to arguments. Okay, so we've seen a valid argument. If the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. And it might not be the case that the premises are true, but if they are, then the conclusion has to be true. Look at this one. Rabbits have 6 legs, dogs have 5 legs. Clearly, these are false statements. These premises are false. However, if I said to you, just for the sake of argument, let's assume rabbits have 6 legs, dogs have 5 legs. What could you say about as a conclusion? What would follow? What would be a strong, fully supported inference, even though these are false? Well, you'd say something like rabbits have more legs than dogs. Again, that's a false statement, but if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Remember, think of it. It's just about the relationship between the terms, between all the parts of the structure of the argument, the form of the argument, not necessarily the content. So again, you got to get your head around this. We're not talking about content here. We're talking about relationships between terms. So if I said, X have 6 legs, Y have 5 legs, while X have more legs than Y's have legs, something like that. So again, try and remember, we're talking about form, we're talking about the logical structure underneath all of this. Now, I'm going to introduce another term. We have seen that this is a deductive argument. It has complete support, and we also, I mentioned that in a deductive argument, I'm going to say I'm going to use the term valid. So this is a valid argument. Now, but yeah, let's now think about content, because when we think about content, you're thinking about arguments in terms of their soundness, right? So if you have a valid argument and you want to talk about whether or not, in fact, not as a conditional, not as a for the sake of argument, but whether or not, in fact, the premises are true, now we're into the term, the concept that applies to the argument called soundness. So let's look at this. Rabbits have 6 legs. Dogs have 5 legs. Rabbits have more legs than dogs. Yeah, it's valid. Premises, if they're true, conclusion has to be true. No problem there. But the premises and the conclusion, this is all false. What are you talking about? This premise is false, so's that one, and that conclusion, but it's perfectly a logical argument. It's a perfectly valid argument. You could say, after uttering this, find a problem with my reasoning. There is no problem with the reasoning. There's a problem with the content, namely the connection that the sentences that serve as premises have to the world. They're false, right? The argument's not false. The argument's valid. But these premises, all the parts of the argument are in fact false. But that doesn't affect the validity. So that's what you have to get your head around, because I'm going to ask you various questions. I could give you arguments that look like this and say, look like this, form, think form. Is it valid? And don't be tricked, because even if it looks totally ridiculous, the content looks ridiculous, but the form might be just fine and the reasoning is flawless. So you can have flawless reasoning. That doesn't mean you're making a good argument. Far from it. You can have flawless reasoning and the argument's terrible. All right. So, but it's still valid, okay? What it's not is, it is not sound. So that's our new term, sound. Remember, when we introduced the notion of an argument, we defined it. When we introduced the notion of validity or valid, we defined it, as having complete support, and then we unpacked that complete support as, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. I'm going to now build on that to give my definition of soundness. So in this case, a sound argument is a valid argument with there we go.